Hi, welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course. And in this module, we're going to be looking at the SandDance visual. The SandDance visual is actually one of my favorites. I think this is a really interesting one because it allows you to take all the different data elements or all the different rows that you have inside of your data set, and it is limited up to 10,000 rows before it starts to consolidate some of them together. But it allows you to then represent them as individual items in a really dynamic visual here. You'll actually see how it can animate between different transitioned views of your data. And you have many different types of views of your data that you can select from. So it's not a traditional type of visual that is just one view of your data. This one can actually transition between multiple views of your data. And you're going to see this is a really impressive tool. It's actually really developed out of Microsoft's Garage or research department. And it's a dynamic tool, I think you'll find, and we have a pretty interesting example that we're going to use to develop with it. So let's go ahead and take a look at where you can go download the SandDance visual, and then how you can start to use it and import it into your Power BI desktop. All right, so our first stop is to go download the SandDance visual. Now, I have highlighted before in the past that you can go to one of two places. You can go to the Visuals Gallery if you go to visuals.powerbi.com. But you'll note, as of the time of me recording this now, that there is an update here where you're actually seeing that this site will become limited support, will be under limited support until May 31st, and all of this will be taken offline, and then the visuals will be located in the Office Store. So you're going to want to go to the Office Store kind of going forward, really. And you can see here, if you go to store.office.com, that'll take you to where you can download Power BI custom visuals. So you can either search here, or you can go underneath Power BI and kind of scroll through and find the ones you want. It might be easier to actually just search for them here. So if I type SandDance as one word, we should find the visual that we want to use right here. It is free, of course. You can select it, and you can see a couple of different views here of what it looks like. I've told you that it's pretty dynamic and that you have multiple types of views you can choose from. This really gives you an idea of the different types of views that you have available to you. Once you select Add, that'll download it for you once you go ahead and select the download the SandDance. And you can also download some sample reports as well, if you'd like to take a look at what others have done with it, or really a sample of what Microsoft has provided for you. This also gives you a little walkthrough of how you can import custom visuals into your Power BI desktop, but we're going to show that ourselves here as well, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So let's go ahead and move over to the Power BI desktop then. We're going to pull in some data that tells us populations for multiple cities in the world, okay? So our first stop here then, of course, is we're going to pull in that data. And you'll find that data by going up to the Get Data section here and selecting Excel. The Excel file that we're going to be using in this example is going to be under my class files that I have here, and you can also find it below if you're watching this on other places. But we're going to be pulling in from my data section here this file here called World Cities. So I'll select World Cities and then choose Open. Once that brings in this data, you'll see there is a spreadsheet in here called Population. We'll select that. And you can see exactly what this data looks like. So we have the city name, we have the latitude and longitude, which we will use. We have the population, the country, as well as this province or state here. All right, so let's go ahead and load this data into Power BI. I'll hit load, and we'll bring this data now into Power BI. All right, now the next thing we need to do, of course, is to bring in the SandDance visual. So if we want to bring in the SandDance, we'll expand this a little bit so you can see the little ellipses showing here. If you already saw the ellipses, that's probably because I have a few of the preview features that are enabled here, so I have a few extra visuals than you might or might not have. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Import from File to bring in the SandDance visual, and select Import a Custom Visual. It's going to give you a little warning, of course, you've seen this before, so go ahead and hit Import past this. And once you do, you're going to go find wherever you downloaded the SandDance visual. So I've downloaded mine underneath this Custom Visuals folder. You want to save that somewhere where it's easy for you to find later. So we'll go ahead and select SandDance here and then hit Open. All right, that's now successfully imported that custom visual, so I can hit OK here, and you'll see the SandDance now appears right here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the SandDance, and I'm going to make it take up the entirety of the screen. Really, we're going to focus just on this one visual for this example. So let's go ahead and make this take up the full screen. The thing that we're going to add to this is going to be up in the field list here. We're going to find several fields that we want to add in, things like the city. So we'll go ahead and select city. We want to go ahead and add in the country. And let's also add in a few other things. Let's add in things like the latitude and longitude. Okay. As well as the population. Now we can put in province in here as well if we wanted to. I don't think we'll use it for this example, but we can certainly add that in here as well if we wanted to. Now you'll notice initially this goes directly into this visual as kind of a column chart here. And you notice there's not really a nice clean way for you to adjust things here. You can, of course, come over here and change what it's counting. You can change the axes. Right now it's showing the axes as cities. You have a few things you can adjust here, but really it's almost like this chart is not able to be adjusted because you see everything that's in the value section in the field well here can only be placed under the value section. There's not a lot you can do with the fields. And the reason that is because the SandDance is a lot different than any of the other visuals we looked at. The SandDance actually has to be configured in a different spot. If you want to tell which field to be used where, you have to do that in a different location here. You can't do it from the traditional place that you've done in all of the other Power BI visuals. So the way this is done here with the SandDance is you're actually going to go first to the Format Paintbrush, and then you'll see this option here called Presentation is the only new feature that's underneath the Custom Visual Format section. And if you expand that, you'll see that there's really not a whole lot of options here other than to turn off Presentation Mode. So if I turn off presentation mode, notice what happens. Basically, this flips between just presenting to an end user and configuring for the developer. Okay, so when you flip presentation off, this is ready to be configured for a developer here. Okay, so we're the developer. We're trying to develop this chart. And so what we want to do is we want to actually go through and start to configure this. And so we can do things like if we wanted to, we could have actually configured this already. We could change the count here to population. And so it's going to do a sum of the population for us here. You'll notice everything is being bucketed underneath as other right now, but we can make some adjustments to that. And we can do a few other things in here. Let's say that we, for example, want to change the view to a scatter. We could easily do that. You'll see up in the top here, there's a section here called View As. And if I hit the View As option here, you can change between several different views. And this is what I was talking about, where the SandDance is very interactive in that it can change between different types of visuals that you have. So for example, if I change this from a column chart to a scatter, you'll notice immediately that it kind of plots this out on a scatter chart. And those are actually dots. Those dots are really tiny and it's hard to see here, but that's about 9,000 dots that we have in our data set that are being plotted out on a scatter chart. Now the reason they're all placed in one single location here, like they are, is because you'll notice the X and the Y axes are using the city field that we have inside of our value section here to be able to plot it out. And really what we want to do is take something like our latitude and longitude and plot it out based on that. So if we change the y-axis from city to latitude, you'll notice it starts to adjust here, and we change the x-axis on the bottom here from city to longitude, notice what happens here. We have very clearly a picture that is brought through of a world map, and that's based off the latitude and longitude coordinates that were inside the data set that we were using. Now, there's a lot of other things we can do with this. This is just one neat way in just a few clicks to be able to take the latitude and longitude and plot it out on a map. And basically, it's just taken those values that we had in our data set and made a map out of a blank scatter plot. So this isn't even a map visual that we just happened to select here. It's a scatter, and we gave it latitude and longitude, and it plotted out that scatter in a way that appears as a map. Now, there's a few other things that we can do here, of course. If we wanted to, we can do something like, say, for example, we wanted to see a color for each country. You'll notice up top here there's an option called Color By, and right now that is set to none, meaning that it's not really coloring anything here. Everything's blue. But what we can do is we can tell it that we want to color by, and instead of coloring by none or nothing, we want to color by something like the country. And so I can select I want to color by the country here. And you can see it makes an attempt here to color each of the countries, but you'll notice a lot of these are being plotted out underneath the other section here. And the reason that is because it's only using so many colors here. There's only so many values that it can do until it buckets everything else underneath the other section. And so what we can do is we can make some adjustments here. If I go back underneath the color by option and you go under things like the pastel section, you can see things like you can increase the number of buckets that are used. So I think this can go up to 12. Okay. So now it's using 12 different colors here. You can kind of select which one of these you'd like to use. You want to use the paired colors, the set 3 colors, whichever ones you want. That's one way to get it started. The other thing that you'll need to do, likely, if you want to see a color for each country, is change this to cycling. And what cycling does is it actually cycles through the color. So once it gets to that last color that's available, it'll start back over. And so if I select cycling, you'll see that now it actually does assign a color for each country that we have. And you can see that here on the map. Each country has a color. Some of the colors are repeated, okay, because there was only 12 color options available in that palette we chose. But you're seeing here an ability to colorize each of these values. The other things you can do in here, if I go back over to palette, you can do things like reverse the order of the palette. If you want the palette to start with brown instead of starting with the light blue over here, you can do reverse and you'll see it kind of flip-flops the palette. That's just really up to you how you'd like that to appear. So there's some things in here that you can certainly do, though, to adjust and make that look more ideal. All right, there's also a few other options in here if you want to kind of do more direct versions of colors, or you want to do a few other options here as far as the legend, how you want to deal with the legend, you can adjust that as well. All right, so let's keep working our way across here. We've kind of looked at the view section. Facet section, by the way, would actually give us a map for each. So say, for example, I wanted to do something like have a facet by country. This would actually create 9 separate maps. You'll notice, again, it's bucketing everything underneath the other section here. And again, that's because it only has so many facets it can use here. Right now, it's only choosing 9 facets, but you can bump that up. And as you start to bump that up, it's going to make a map for each of those facets. It might not necessarily make sense to do for this one, but you kind of get the idea. Basically, this is making a chart, and you're charting by a certain categorical version of your data. Okay, and you can bump this up quite a bit if you wanted to. I have now 417 different facets, and it's going to really take over the visual. I'm going to remove that, though, and so if I want to remove any of these fields, if I don't want to facet by anything here, I can select none, and that'll return it back to where it was. All right, good deal. All right, there's a few other things that are really interesting that we can do in here as well. One of the things I particularly like is the ability to highlight certain values. So say, for example, I want to highlight the United States and filter everything else out. I can do that by just selecting, clicking, and dragging, and I can highlight a certain area of the map or a certain area of my data set, and then I can use this option here called Isolate, and if I do that, it's now going to isolate just those values that I've selected. That's really the beauty here of using the SandDance, is the ability to kind of highlight things and select them. And you can use the revert mode here. If you select this will reset and send it back to where it was. You can also do the reverse of that. So if I wanted to not select those but filter those out, I could select them again. And so if I don't want those to be my filter, I want to filter everything but that, filter them out, I can hit this option here, and that'll actually filter just that section out and have everything else here. So I can hit the little reset button, and let's say I only wanted to have the top hemisphere here. I can select everything on the bottom and filter those items out, and then it's going to bring me just the top part of the map here. Okay, and if you ever want to reverse that and reset the filters that are selections, or the selections here, you can select this little recycle button, and that'll send it back to where it's at. Now, let's do this one more time. I'm going to select and filter just the United States here. I'll filter that. Okay, and you'll notice you do have this option here, this little information section here. That actually works whenever you select items. And by the way, you can select and filter down even deeper if I wanted to. If I wanted to see just the Southeast, I can select just the Southeast values here. And you can also select this little show details in the selected items. And then this lets you kind of scroll back and forth through all the items that you have. And you can select and see those values and see what those values represent here, and this little detail section here. So that's kind of nice as well. You do have a tooltip kind of area. If you hover above, you can see a tooltip there showing as well. Okay. All right. And again, like I said, you can filter on your filter. So if I wanted to zoom in even more and see just the Southeast, you can see how to do that here. All right. Very interesting. So this is a cool visual. Let's actually explore a little bit more of what's possible. Let's go over to the settings area here. I'm going to leave this open here. We can unfilter some of this stuff in a few moments. But let's go over to the settings here and talk about what's possible here. If you go over to the app settings, you'll see there's quite a bit that's available in here. And we're not necessarily going to go over every little bit of this, because that would make for about a 45-minute video. But what we will highlight on is some of the things that might be interesting to you. So this first section here, the icon bar, this is the icon bar up top here. This section here where you see the icons. This gives you the ability to turn on some additional features, things like the about. That's going to give you more information about the visual. You can do things like turn on a undo. So if you make a mistake and you want to undo something, you can turn on the undo button right here. So you have a few things that you can kind of add in here as well. There's also some things like themings and select modes that you can turn on here on the bottom, but that's really a few of the things that you have underneath the icon bar section. All right, next underneath the big bar, if you go over to the big bar area, this is where you can actually add and remove the items on the left-hand side of the bar. So these are the big bar. This is the big bar over here on the left-hand side. This is where you can do things like add in, let's say, how many items I have. So this is going to give me the total number of items. I can see how many I have filtered. So this tells me how many I have filtered. This tells me how many I have selected. And right now I have none selected. And you may want to add in things like the X and the Y coordinates here. You can see them here on the Y and X axes here, but you can also see them up top if you want to adjust them. So that's kind of a nice feature that you have there available to you. You also have some things like being able to adjust the size, the shape by, those things are available in here as well. Not necessarily needed for what we're doing in this visual. All right, let's work our way over to the views section. Under the views section here, this is where you can actually add new views. Remember, right now we're looking at a scatter view, but you can come in here and add new views that you don't already have turned on by default. And so why not? Let's turn them all on just so we can see what's available. And I'll go ahead and select all those views. And if I click away here for a moment, let's hit the X here. You can see underneath the view as section, you have quite a few more views that have now been added. And so I can kind of go back and forth and say, maybe I want to see a radius. And let's unfilter this for a moment. Let's unselect. And then take a look. This kind of looks like a globe now, doesn't it? It's gotten a nice view here on a radial view. You can certainly do things like maybe I want to see it as a 3D view. So it's going to give you a kind of a 3D map view here, or an attempted 3D map view. This actually gives you some extra coordinates as well that you can add in at this point. You have other things in here like a bar chart, if you want to see this more as a bar. And again, we're doing the bar as latitude here, so that might not make complete sense the way that the chart is currently designed. But it gives you some neat options in here like that. Let's flip this back to the scatter for a moment, though. All right, let's go back underneath this settings section here and just talk about some of the rest of these. We're not going to make changes to all of them, but I want to talk through them at least. Underneath the animation section, this is where you can control the animation that you saw whenever I transition from one item to another. That's the animation that you're able to control here, the speed at which it does that, and a few other things as well. Underneath the 3D options, whenever you're viewing in a 3D view, you have some ability to kind of adjust and make some changes to the 3D view here. The hover has to do whenever you kind of have that tooltip view, when you hover above something, how do you want it to handle that? Selection actually allows you to do things like change the color of the selection. So if I were to select the United States again here, I can actually change that. Instead of seeing that as a blue or a cyan, I can change it to something like maybe an orange if I wanted to. And you would see that next time I go to select it, it should highlight as an orange instead. So you have some ability to make some changes there if you wanted to. You can also change the color of the unselected areas if you wanted to as well. All right, let me unselect that for a moment. Go over to chart. Let's talk about what you have in the chart section here. Underneath the chart section, you have the ability to kind of change the opacity of the chart. So if I wanted to, I can lower the opacity here, and you can see it kind of changes the way that you view the chart itself here. Let me bump that back up. You can also do things like change the frame opacity. So the frame opacity will be what you see around the chart. So if I do that, I can kind of adjust that, and you'll see the frame, the X and Y axes kind of disappear there a bit. And you can have a few other things you can do in here. So for example, if you wanted to change the canvas color right now, there is no color on the canvas, but if I wanted to make it blue, you can kind of get a ocean look to it, although that's a very deep blue there. You can also select beach blue there, maybe a little bit more appropriate if you wanted to there. All right, so I'm going to leave it as none though. Don't think I necessarily need that for this example. All right, then underneath the UI section here, what you'll find under the UI section is you can actually change how the labels appear. So if you want to bump up the axis size, you can do that here, make it so it's a little bit easier to read. That is not underneath the Format Paintbrush area where you would normally find it. You can also bump up the legend, which is covered up right now, but if I bumped up the legend, that would make the legend a little larger over here as well. So you can see the legend got a little larger. You can also change the color that's used for those. A few other things you can change in here, but it's mainly kind of aesthetics of the chart itself. All right, so then underneath the data section, if you go underneath data, this is where it actually tells and defines how to bend things together whenever you have a large amount of data. Remember, this chart is limited to 10,000 rows, so this is how you can kind of control how to bend things together, okay? The last thing underneath Insights. Insights is actually something we haven't talked about yet, but Insights are almost like having the ability to play through a story of your data here with the SandDance. If you've ever played with a tool called Power Map in Excel, this kind of reminds me of Power Map the way that it works. In Power Map, you actually create an animation where it tells you across time what's happened with your data. You can do the same thing with a SandDance, and we haven't talked about that yet, but basically this Insights option allows you to create multiple scenes, and here you can tell it the duration that it's going to play for each of the scenes. So right now, this is saying that you have 3 seconds per each scene, and it's going to loop over and over until basically you tell it to stop. All right, so let's actually go take a look at what Insights are. And the way you'll find that is if you go over to the Insights panel right here. And how did I know that's the Insights panel? Well, I just kind of know. One little trick that you might want to do is underneath the UI section, underneath UI, you can actually turn on the text. You'll see here, show text on the menu, and that'll make it a little easier for you to understand what each of these things are. So that's a little trick underneath the UI section of settings. You can turn on the text so you know what that is. And here I can now see that it is Insights. All right, so let's go ahead and click on Insights here. And if you click on Insights, it's going to expand a panel on the left-hand side. And here you can actually start to create multiple views of your data and create an animation where it actually plays through the changes of your data. And so what I might want to do in this one to make this really interesting is I'll change this to a different view to start off with. Let's make the view initially here, let's say random. And random just literally is a random scattering of your data. And we can add an insight here or add a new view of the data. And if you do that, it's basically giving you a new view here that you can see is the first animation that it's going to start with. And then what I can do is I can go back up to my view and say, well, let's not view this as random anymore. Let's now view this as a scatter where we saw the map earlier. And now I can see that it creates this into a map. And I can make another view here, or another insight I can create. Now I have multiple insights. It's going to transition from the random one to the map one here in a few moments. Let's do another one. Let's go back up to the View As section here, and let's view this one as a column chart. And if we view this as a column chart, you can see that the population is going to be represented by the size of those blocks that you see here. And then all the values that are going to the farther right-hand corner of each of these columns are going to be lower and lower sections or lower and lower populations. Now, again, it's doing this by an x-axis of the longitude, so you may want to change some things like that, but for our purposes, that's fine. And so what we'll go ahead and do is add one more insight view here. And so now we've gotten 3 insight views, and what will happen is if I come back to the first one here, the random one, and hit play or show, but let's go ahead and hit play so it actually animates it. What'll happen is it'll start off random, stay there for 3 seconds. Remember, that was a setting we saw a few moments ago. Then it'll transition to the map, stay there for 3 seconds. Then it'll transition to the column chart, and then it'll transition back to random again. And so this is a way that you can kind of work with SandDance to make it more interactive. Of course, you can always hit stop here or pause. If you hit stop, it kind of reverts you back to where you were. If you hit pause, it just kind of stays there for a few moments until you tell it to start again. You can also hit show, and show just makes it more interactive where you can actually kind of click through and you can click next up here whenever you're ready to go see the next one, or you can hit previous if you're ready to see the previous one. So you have the ability to kind of manually go through this as opposed to the play button, which actually follows those rules that we set in the settings earlier. Whenever we went into those settings, remember underneath settings, underneath the insight section, underneath insights, we found where you can actually control how long it stays under each of those sections there. All right, so that's really it for SandDance. There's a lot here going on. It's a really cool visual. I really like it. You can certainly make it a full screen view here if you wanted to. And you probably want to turn it back. Remember what we started off doing when we started the very beginning of this demonstration? We went underneath the format paintbrush here and we turned off the presentation mode. You may want to turn it back on once you get to the end and you're done developing so that whoever is now interacting with the chart just can kind of see it and play around with it, okay? They can still do things like select. If you highlight this, that'll allow you to do cross-filtering, so I can select the values like this, and that would cross-filter anything else I have. If they click in the background of the chart or don't select anything, that reverts the selection in here. So that's the SandDance for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this visual. Look forward to showing you our next custom visual in the next module. Thanks a lot.